So just a couple things to wrap up for the Chicago Places. Share the screen. So before this next week, whatever notes you spoke from tonight, make sure you go to Module 2, the Chicago Places assignment, and click that and upload whatever notes you spoke from. Also keep in mind you want to save those notes for the final speech portfolio that's at the end of the course. And so whether you are saving that as a document on its own or you're copying and pasting that into a master Word document, whatever, but just a reminder that we have the master speech portfolio, which is essentially every speech from this course. Let him know we've started back. We have started back. Yes. Yes.
Mind if I submitted that to my outline?
Yes.
Because I saw the deadline and I was like.
Yes. Sorry. I'll change that deadline. But yes, whatever you spoke from, whatever outline notes you have, submit it. I don't actually look at it, but it triggers a spot for me to insert a grade. So yeah.
If I wasn't in the outline format that you gave us, I kind of made it into different paragraphs.
That's fine. For this practice speech, it's fine. Whatever you got. Yeah. Okay. Are you able to submit a second time or no? Okay. I can forget what it's called. Revert it or yeah, and send it back to you so you can submit it. So I'll do that when I go in and change the deadline. So that's where you go to. And I forgot, I actually for this semester changed it to 100 points. So the fact that you are here, the fact that you did it, you just got 100 points. So just make sure you submit documentation to that, and you will you have those points. So this is the last of the practice speeches. And what you did tonight is a smaller version of what we are doing for the informative speech. And so as we move forward, so you know where some resources are, as a part of this assignment, we have the speech outline template, specifically the informative speech template that you should be using for the formal informative speech. I also have the PowerPoint template and an example. And that example of my Chicago Places example is actually a 5 to 7 minute informative speech. So it was more than just a short practice speech. So you can use that as an example. You can also go to the course resources section, which is underneath Module 4. And you can go, and this is where anything and everything is. If you're within an assignment and you click on a link and it makes you log in or doesn't give you the ability to download it, there's an error with the link. So go to course resources. That's where I've essentially uploaded everything for this course. You'll even see the rubric that we'll talk about next week that I use to grade informative speeches, which includes everything that we've been learning about. And you'll also see some examples. So you'll see the informative speech Fleece Blanket, informative speech Orlando that we're going to talk about tonight that are examples from other students of informative speeches. So all of these examples are here for you. Use them to guide you as you are preparing your informative speech. So let's go to where we are going to next. So the first thing that we do, and kind of a reminder of the process for our formal speeches, the first thing that we do is we're going to select the topic. So that is, and that involves doing what we learned about last week. So deciding what is your subject, right? What do you want to teach us about? The general purpose is the same. It stays the same. It doesn't change for the speech. It's to inform. You then choose the type. Is it about an object, a process, an event, or concept? You then choose the method in which you want to inform us, the informative method. Are you going to define, maybe describe the way something looks, explain how something is or why something is, or demonstrate how to do something? So all of these are informative methods, ways of teaching, essentially. And then down at the bottom, we have our organizational pattern, the order of our main points. And so this is what we do to select our topic. And so Tonight, I'll ask for you just to write your general subject. Last week I asked you to start thinking about what it is you want to inform us about. I'll just ask you to write the general subject up on the board so we ensure there aren't any duplicates. Now, you may have the same general subject, but what we know or what will guide us is what you post on Blackboard, on the discussion post. So you'll see that there's a discussion post set up for you to post and select your topic. This is what you're posting right there, this first part of the informative speech outline. So make sure you download that template and you're just selecting, you're making these choices. You're filling in the subject and you're selecting one of these options. Posting that on the discussion board claims your topic, selects your topic, and so it may be the same general subject, but you may be going a different direction with it, right? You may be talking about cars, but you may be talking about how cars are made, the process of how cars are made. You may be describing that process, and you may be doing it in chronological order. Someone else, cars may be their general subject, and they may be talking about it as an object, maybe explaining how cars maybe have evolved over time, and they're doing it chronologically. So you can have the same general subject, but not the same exact speech. And so before the 3rd of October, you'll need to at least just do this part right here, post this on Blackboard, select your topic. Make sure you review the people who have posted before you post, so that you make sure you're not duplicating exactly what someone else is doing. Once you select your topic, you move forward in the drafting process, and we'll look at some examples of that tonight. And so that's the second stage. The drafts are not due. I was probably a little behind or sped things up when I was talking earlier. The drafts aren't due until the 10th. And so that's when the drafts are due. And then you take it from draft to final outline. And I give you time to do that, right? You just did a speech, an informative speech in 1 week, right? You have much longer to do this informative speech, right? We're selecting the topic, writing the draft. You have a whole week where all you're doing is working on this speech before the week that it is due. And so, so you have essentially 3 weeks where you're working on this one speech. And so, and then from there, you do the final speech outline, full sentence outline, you'll deliver it in class, and then the following week, you'll submit a reflection assignment on it. And that completes it. That's what we're gonna do for our informative speech. We'll do the same thing for our persuasive speech in order to build this skill. And so let's take a look at an example of, this could be a starting point of a draft. And so if anyone knows how to get rid of this little thing down below, there we go. So let's take a look at this draft. So this is one example. So remember, when we write our speeches, we start with the body of our speech, and we're going to start with the main points. We need to know what are the main points of our speech that we want to get across to our audience. So for me, I want to talk about the events of a triathlon. And so for me, I know these are going to be my main points, the 3 events: swimming, cycling, and running. Did anyone ever run a triathlon or participate in a triathlon? You have. Awesome. Yeah, man. Kudos. It's hard. Yeah. So, so if you have some personal experience with it, you can do a speech like this and share some personal stories. So here, this example, I've completed the subject, the triathlon. General purpose is to inform. The type, this is going to be the event, right? I'm putting my subject into one of those categories: object, process, event, or concept. The method in which I'm going to explain is I'm going to explain essentially a little bit about each of these events, how these events work. And so that's why I'm choosing explain. I could do describe and maybe say I'm going to describe the features, help you see visually, visually experience each of these events. Again, it's less important what category it fits into. It's more important that you make the decision up front what category you're going to go with, so you know what information to go out and to collect, right? Because if I was doing description, I would be going out and collecting descriptions. If I'm doing explain, so I'm going out and collecting how or why for this particular subject. I could probably do demonstrate. How do you physically do each of these events? Right? Or maybe I could tailor it to being training. How do you train for each of these events? And do more of a demonstration speech. Again, I'm going out and collecting demonstrations. So our method, our informative method, is that information that we're collecting to include in the body of our speech. My organizational pattern is going to be, I'm doing chronological, swimming, cycling, running. And then that's it. So my specific purpose is to inform my audience of 3 events in a triathlon. And then my central idea, or what we call our redundant touchstone, the 3 events of a triathlon are swimming, cycling, running. And then I've created some kind of catchy title. And then here are my main points. So for your draft, I'm at the bare minimum, I'm looking for this. I'm looking for what are your main points. I would encourage you, since your draft isn't due until the 10th, add some supporting points to that, right? At least go out and do some research and include a quote, include a story, include some of that supporting material so that you're able to move along in the progress and process of writing a speech. You don't want to get behind. So that's why I have the draft due, because I'll give you feedback on your draft, and then you'll continue to expand on it. Here's an example of another informative speech. So this one about Muhammad Ali, that's my general subject. So if I was writing this on the board today, I would just write Muhammad Ali. My general purpose stays the same, it's to inform. Remember, people, if we're talking about people, they qualify as an object because they're pretty stable in form. Muhammad Ali as a person, not necessarily changing. And so when I go out and do research on Muhammad Ali, those facts are pretty stable in form. My method is I'm going to define. So I'm going to provide synonyms, meaning, background, historical context on my subject, Muhammad Ali. Then I'm going to do it topically, right? Remember, topical organizational pattern is the simplest because it's just 3 topics related to your subject. I could also do chronological. I could say Muhammad Ali, as a young man, Muhammad Ali as an Olympian, Muhammad Ali in his older years, and do it chronologically in order of time. So again, it's the choices that we make. It's choose your own adventure. So for this, I'm doing topical. Some organizational patterns and some methods go better together. I think I mentioned that before. If you do a process, chances are you're going to be doing that process chronologically, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3. So chances are, if your method or if your type is process, that your method is going to be, organizational pattern is going to be chronological. So those 2 can kind of influence each other. My specific purpose is to inform my audience of the accomplishments of Muhammad Ali. My central idea, or my redundant touchstone, is that Muhammad Ali was an accomplished boxer, activist, and humanitarian. Those are my 3 points. I create some kind of catchy title, The Life of a Legend, 3 accomplishments of Muhammad Ali. And then there are my main points, with a start of some supporting points, right? So my supporting points first, Muhammad Ali as a boxer, that's my first topic. So Muhammad Ali as a boxer, so Muhammad Ali won an Olympic gold medal in the World Heavyweight Championship. So I'm going to go out and collect some data about that and include a quote, include a story, include a statistic, maybe. Then I'm going to transition to, now that I've shared with you about Muhammad Ali as a boxer, let me share with you about him as an activist. So Muhammad Ali supported civil rights and opposed the Vietnam War. That was his political beliefs and what he did as an activist. So now that you know about him as an activist, let me talk to you about him as a humanitarian. So he devoted his life after boxing to a lot of charitable causes. And then I would go into detail about what those charitable causes were. So here again, this is at the bare minimum what I'm looking for a draft. But if you can go ahead and move forward, not only get this, but add some good supporting points to it, then that is what I'll be looking for when you submit that draft on the 10th. Questions about that? So let me give you some other examples. Let me start with, did the triathlon and did Muhammad Ali. So let me now show you in. All right, so let's take a look at, this is my third example. So this again would be something I would submit for a draft. So my topic being the state of Alabama. My general purpose is going to be to inform. That doesn't change. My type for this, I'm selecting object. For your draft, you can, whatever you're selecting, you can bold it and then just delete the rest if you want. So that way it cleans up the outline as you're working on it. So for this, I'm talking about the state of Alabama. It's pretty stable in form, not changing. For this, I'm going to describe. I'm going to provide some vivid details, some word pictures about some specific places that you can visit in the state of Alabama. My organizational pattern is going to be spatial, right? So spatial is in order of location, in order of direction. And so for that, I'm going to talk about the cities of Birmingham, Montgomery, and Tuscaloosa, and I'm going to do so starting in the center of the state, and I'm going to move west to east, essentially. So Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, down to Montgomery. And so those are my main points. I'm going to add a little more to it because I'm describing features of each of these places. The features I'm specifically describing are going to be these places that you can visit. So the 16th Street Baptist Church, specifically an event that was related to that, a historical event. Tuscaloosa, the stand in the schoolhouse door by the governor. And then Montgomery, the bus boycott and Bloody Sunday. So I'm working in events in some way, right? Because I'm interested in these events. But I'm still doing it where I'm describing what these places look like. I'm describing some of the features that you would see at these places, while also tying in a little bit of historical connection. So I could also say, maybe I'm explaining why each of these cities are important. So I could very easily just switch it to explain. So I'm explaining why Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, and Montgomery are important. It's because of these historical events. So that's an example. And again, it's less so important for you to figure this out afterwards, and more important to figure out which direction you want to go here at the start. And again, it's some of it's a little gray, some of it isn't necessarily clear cut, but it helps give you a direction. And if you have a direction to go, that's the most important part with these first steps as part of the preparation stage. Here's another example about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That's my topic, general subject. General purpose is going to be to inform. Type. This, I'm going to do events. I'm going to focus on some events that have happened. My method is I'm going to provide some background and historical context about these events, and I'm going to do it in chronological order. So I'm going to start in 1963 with Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. Then I'm going to proceed to 1965, the Our God is Marching On. And then 1968, his last speech before he was assassinated, the I've Been to the Mountaintop speech. So here, doing it in chronological order. Make sense? So again, we don't write papers, we don't write essays, except for the reflection, but these are speech outlines. This is the first step, is a draft of our outlines. Another simple one would be, here's a process speech. So this one is about fire extinguishers, right? Simple, just research some stuff about fire extinguishers. I'm going to talk about it as a process of using fire extinguishers. I'm going to explain how to use a fire extinguisher And so because it's a process, chances are I could either do topical or chronological. Those are really the only two organizational patterns that make sense. So chronological, step 1 is going to be pull the pin, step 2, aim, step 3, squeeze, step 4, sweep. And so I'm going to talk through each of those steps and how to do that correctly. That's an example of a process speech, yeah. Not for this speech. I mean, technically in real life you can, but for this speech we want to focus just on informing. Yeah, we'll get to persuade later. Yeah. So you choose, so essentially if you see both options on the outline, select to inform, because that's what we're doing now. We'll learn about to persuade later. Later, in order to persuade, you have to inform us. So usually information is the first part of a persuasive speech. For this, we're just giving information. So there's that example. So let me share with you some of the examples that are on Blackboard. So let's see, share. So some of my brainstorming process, I just kind of wanted to introduce you to it. So when brainstorming, right, we can just start with something like this. So you could just start with something like this, right? Just simple cars, right? So cars, what's going to be my informative method? I'm going to describe how am I going to order my main points. I'm going to do it topically. Corvette, Camaro, Chevy Volt, right? 3 types of Chevy cars. You know, so as you're brainstorming, you know, thinking through, you can go different directions. So here's an example of maybe I'm still doing the subject of cars, but I'm going to explain, essentially, I'm going to compare 2 options, Fords versus Toyota. And I'm going to compare the differences between these car companies. So I'm actually talking about car companies. Car engines, so you get like, I like cars. Car engines is another one. So I could explain chronologically the order of how engines were created, gas, electric, and then the newest being hybrid. I'm doing so where I'm explaining how are they created, why were they created. So that's, again, gives me that direction. I could also do it as an informative speech of definition, and I could do it topically where I'm just providing what is a gas engine, what is an electric engine, what is a hybrid engine. So same subjects, just going a little bit different direction with it. I could do a comparative. That was the one at the very bottom where I'm comparing 1 or 2 or more things, right? So this is going to be, I'm going to be comparing gas versus hybrid, hybrid versus electric. So comparing the similarities or differences between these types of engines. So if this is where you need to start, just doing some kind of brainstorming like this to think through, okay, what are with this subject, what are the various directions I can go that may help. So you'll see this on Blackboard as well, if that helps. Let's take a look at an example from a student. This was a process speech, and I was using a little bit different outline template. I've modified the outline template since time. Share. Okay. Let's take a look at the Orlando one first. So this also, again, is on Blackboard, but gives you an example of a full draft. So this is someone who took not only those main points, but they expanded it. And here you can see some of the things we talked about last week. So you can see they actually not only have the body of their speech, but they thought out the introduction and the conclusion. So, but if we start with the body, they're talking about the top 3 places to visit in Orlando, Florida. So first is Universal Studios, then Walt Disney World, and then SeaWorld. So here we have these 3 places to visit in Orlando. So they started out here in the body of their speech, so they have their main points and their supporting points. Part of what they continued doing after submitting this draft was they added a bunch of subpoints, right? So the history of Universal Studios, and they typed in full sentences the history that they wanted to share. And then essentially it's the history for each of these. So you see some parallel structure, and then you see some rides, essentially. And actually on this one, she hadn't thought through specifically a second ride, so she just put rides to fill the place. And that was fine, because it was just a draft. So drafts don't have to be completely thought out, but it gives me an idea of the direction that you want to go. The more complete it is, the more feedback I can give you. And so that's why I encourage you to do all that you can. So then after that, she went back and then wrote her introduction, right? So starting with that attention step, she starts with a quote. Then she builds rapport. By a show of hands, how many of us here have been to Florida? Now specifically Orlando. So she's getting involvement and building that rapport. Wherever we've vacationed, all of us have heard of Florida, right? So we at least heard of that place. And so we have that in common. We build that and establish that common ground. Their credibility step, they cite specifically a credible source. And part of my feedback to them was, tell us why we should listen to you. And she said, oh, well, I'm from Florida. I'm from Orlando. Include that, add that to your credibility step. Not only can you cite a credible source, but you should be responding to why we should be listening to you as the speaker. And so she did that and said, hey, I'm from Florida, I'm from Orlando, and added some credibility there. And then the preview step, which I heard many of you use a preview step, right? So we'll learn what makes the Sunshine State the ultimate vacation spot by exploring the top 3 places to visit in Orlando: Universal Studios, Walt Disney World, and SeaWorld. So we're previewing our main points to build in that redundancy for our audience. So then she goes into her main points with supporting points and then transition statements, right? So after hearing what Universal Studios has to offer, it's time we learn how little kids stay entertained at the happiest place on earth, also known as Disney World. And then talks about Disney World. And then after Disney World, now that we've explored some of the attractions at Disney, let's dive into our final destination, SeaWorld. So she's using some creative language there. Did you get it? Dive into SeaWorld. Okay, there you go. So some creative language, right? It's not fancy, but it's there, right? And helps our speeches be more dynamic. She talks about the SeaWorld, and then once she's done talking about SeaWorld, she says, in conclusion, I heard many of you say that today as well in your practice speech. So in conclusion, and then she reviews, I've identified the top 3 places in Orlando, Florida, or to visit in Orlando, Florida: Universal Studios, Walt Disney World, and SeaWorld. And so keep in mind that your review mirrors your preview step, right? You're basically saying the same exact thing. In fact, I'm listening for you to say the same exact thing, right? Top 3 places in Orlando: Universal Studios, Walt Disney World, SeaWorld. You tell us that to start. The body of your speech, you go into that in more detail. So we hear those main points, and then the conclusion of your speech, you review. I have identified, we have explored, she could say, the top 3 places to visit in Orlando, Florida, Universal Studios, Walt Disney World, SeaWorld. And then she had this, and part of my feedback to her was anything else that you have after you've reviewed your main points actually goes down to your memorable closing. So she, for her final version, moved this, looking back at the question I asked in the beginning, we can now say that Orlando draws in so many people because there's always something to do. So any additional thing that you're including after your review is your memorable closing, right? It's how you're wrapping up your speech. And then the last thing she shared was a quote, right? A quote from Walt Disney, which I know some of you included in your practice speech. So that is a full draft. So if you can get to this point before the 10th, that would be even better, because again, I can give you feedback on this. And then from this, all she really had to do was fill in these supporting points, and she was done. And so that gave her very little she had to do in that week break that where there weren't any assignments due. And then you see the references section. She's got that listed at the bottom in APA format. So she included all of her references. So again, this example, at this time when I was teaching the class, I had a lot less up here in the preparation stage. So keep in mind that the outline you're using, I still want to see that preparation stage at the start of your outline, right? With the choices you've made. What is the type? What is the method? What is the organizational pattern? After I taught this class, students were still kind of struggling with how do I get started knowing what information I need to go collect. That's when I inserted the preparation stage. I don't think that's a part of really any other speech class, because this outline has been created and modified over the years I've been teaching this class. So then let's see if this one will show up. Here we are. So this is the last example I have, and that's going to be about making that comfortable fleece blanket. So this student, they made these for hospitals. They gave them to like neonatal units. Kind of a project that she enjoyed doing. So we start out with the body of the speech, so we know what main points we need to include. So for her, she's doing this, it's a process, she's talking about it chronologically. For some people, they say, okay, I'm doing a process, I'm talking about it chronologically, but I'm not meeting that time requirement. So pay close attention to what I say next, because if you fall into that category where you're going to do a process and your process is very quick, keep in mind you have to meet a minimum time requirement. And so you have to fill it in with other stuff. And so for her, I said, let's include some more context. Why are you making these fleece blankets? Where do these fleece blankets go? So she incorporated that into the final version of her speech. Because just talking about measuring, cutting, and tying these fleece blankets, fleece material together to make a blanket was just too short. So, but this draft, again, allowed me that opportunity to give her that feedback. So we went through the body, the introduction of her speech. She then shares this personal story about how she came across these fleece blankets. Her rapport step to build that common ground. Do you want a warm, fuzzy blanket? Do you also want a blanket you can customize yourself? I'm sure we all enjoy, right? We're kind of making an assumption. I'm sure we all enjoy cuddling up with something warm and fuzzy. So to build that rapport, that common ground. Credibility, she quotes or cites a source that is credible. And so again, part of my feedback for her was, I love how you share, I've been making these blankets for 2 years, maybe share a little bit more of that. But here she does say, she gives that personal credibility, that personal ethos. I've been making these for 2 years. She then previews her main points. Today I'm going to show you 3 steps to making your own comfortable fleece blanket. Measure, cut, and tie. So she's previewing those main points. She then goes into the body of her speech, where you'll see her main points, you'll see a rough draft of her supporting points, and you'll see her transition statements. Right? Her transition statements are very clear cut, right? Now that we have all the measuring out of the way, it's time to cut. Then we talk about cutting. We're done with cutting. Moving on to the final step, which is to tie. Now we have to decide which method to use to end the blanket. So we decide to not tie or invert. So there is that last point. Then we're done with our last main point. We go to the conclusion. In conclusion, I have shown you 3 steps to making a comfortable fleece blanket. Then we go into our memorable closing. You can make them short, long, wide, skinny. Whenever you need a blanket to snuggle up to while you're watching a movie, this will be your go-to blanket. Since this is the best blanket I've ever made, I know you'll want to make one for yourself. And that was her conclusion. And she said, thank you. Remember, you say thank you at the very end so your audience knows that you're done with your speech. And then you take your seat to applause. Here she did a great job of including her references in APA format. These are just the sources that she used throughout her speech. Part of what she would do after this point is she would, for all of those sources, she would insert those into her speech, or make sure that there were citations, like we learned about before, included throughout her speech. So I'll be looking in the written version of your outline, I'll be looking for those citations, but I'll also be listening to those verbal citations, like this one right here. A fun fact about fleece, according to Shirts in Bulk, right? And then she paraphrases. It's not a direct quote, she just paraphrases what they say. That is an extremely warm, because it's a strong fabric that dries quickly, right? She just paraphrased what they say. So there's another example of an informative speech. That's also on Blackboard for you. So now, any questions about that? Yeah, on Blackboard, course resources. Look under course resources. All right. Make sense? So, look to those. Again, you're using the outline, the updated outline, but look to the fleece blanket example, the Orlando example, specifically to guide you, because that's what I'm looking for when you submit your draft on the 10th. It's something along those lines. Again, the more complete it can be with sources, with full sentences, the better, right? Because I can review that and give you feedback. So my schedule is I will be in Washington State during this time. I was thinking they were due before I left, but they're not. So I will be grading them from the beautiful city, or reviewing them from the beautiful city of Spokane. You get points just for submitting a draft. So I shouldn't say grade. I'm not using a rubric to grade the drafts. You submit a draft, you get points for that. What's most important is that I get you feedback. And so I'll do my best to get you feedback during the week following this. So the 10th, 11th, 12th. If I can get it done, maybe I'll be in the airport doing it on the 14th. So that's kind of the timeline when I'll be working to just get you some feedback on your drafts. That way you have it, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, right? You can work on it. If you want me to look at it again, I'm happy to look at it again, but it's not due until the 24th. The 24th is that full sentence outline, just like you see with my Chicago Places example, or my civic engagement news example that's on Blackboard and course resources. Look to those for examples of full sentence outlines. That's the expectation for what's due on the 24th. On the 24th, you'll also deliver, and so that's what we're going to talk about next week is delivery. I want to kind of preview for us a formal informative speech so that you get an idea how all this comes together. Because once you have the outline, once you have a draft outline, you can start rehearsing your speech. You can start reading through it. You can start revising it. Sometimes it takes reading through it to know how it sounds coming out. And so read through it, read it out loud, read it to a friend, and modify it, revise it, update it. And so, again, starting with the drafting stage and moving on until you deliver it on the 24th, I would encourage you every day, every couple of days, as part of your homework, read it, review it, revise it. And so even if it's just looking at it once in the morning or once at night to just read through it, that just getting familiar with the content. Remember, we learned from our ancient Greek rhetoricians that just internalizing that material is helpful. And so we want to internalize, not memorize, but internalize the material. And so just reading through your outline will help you internalize that material. Because we want to be able to then transition our full sentence outline to note cards. And it's those note cards that we will use when we get up here in the front of the classroom and deliver our speech. So let's watch this example. Not a perfect example, but it is a a good example of someone delivering a formal informative speech. You're going to see they're going to use a PowerPoint. And so, so notice how their PowerPoint looks, because we'll dive more into that next week. Notice that they're using formal language. This is a formal speech. So they're getting up, they're looking professional, they sound professional. That professional dialect, which we'll touch on next week with delivery, is part of delivering a formal informative speech. So listen to how it sounds. It's going to sound maybe a little weird, because this isn't a motivational speech. This isn't a class lecture. It is a formal speech. And so also, while you listen to it, take notes. Take notes and whatever you have to take notes with. And I want you to make note of what is her general subject. Can you identify what her general subject is? Can you identify what her main informative method is, right? What type of information is she including? Can you identify the type of speech it is? Is it about an object, a process, an event, or concept? And it may not be clear cut. It may be a little confusing, and you may have different answers for that after we get done watching it, and that's fine. And then also, what is her organizational pattern? Can you identify what her organizational pattern is? I like this speech because she actually has a primary and a secondary organizational pattern. And what I mean by that is you might pick up on this. She has a primary organizational pattern for her main points, but then each main point is organized by a specific organizational pattern. So she has a primary and secondary, one for her main points, one for her subpoints. So see if you can identify those things. So subject, her method, her type, and her organizational pattern. Either her primary or her secondary. We'll watch this, we'll touch base about it, and that'll wrap us up for tonight. So let's watch this example.
Hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, tsunamis. We're familiar with these natural disasters. But for all the death and destruction they cause, they're minuscule compared to the full force of planet Earth. Beneath our feet are what National Geographic calls sleeping giants that stir occasionally, but will someday wake up and roar with unprecedented force. What are these sleeping giants? In a word, supervolcanoes. Supervolcanoes don't erupt often, but when they do, they transform our world. As a geoscience major, I've been fascinated by supervolcanoes for a long time, but I know even more about them after doing research for this speech. Today, we'll first examine the mechanics of supervolcanoes. Second, we'll examine the way they shape our world. And third, we'll look at a supervolcano that's located right here in the United States. Let's begin with the mechanics. Supervolcanoes are the result of massive magma pools beneath the Earth's surface. Magma consists primarily of molten rock. As a 2014 article in the journal Nature Geoscience explains, magma seeps from deep in the Earth into giant chambers in the Earth's crust, where it cools and hardens. Over time, more magma seeps into the chamber and pushes it towards the surface. Over tens of thousands or even millions of years, enough pressure builds to produce a supervolcano. Scientists have created a scale to measure volcanic eruption. It's called the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or VEI, and it's based on the amount of debris that is released into the atmosphere by an eruption. As seen on this chart from the US Geological Survey website, the VEI consists of an 8-step scale. Each step is 10 times more powerful than the preceding step. A supervolcano is up here at the top, VEI 8. For comparison, the famous eruption of Mount Vesuvius that buried the ancient Roman city of Pompeii in 79 AD is down here at VEI 5. a supervolcano eruption would be at least 250 times more powerful than Mount Vesuvius. According to science writer Amanda D'Amato, a supervolcano eruption is like 1,000 atomic bombs going off every second. Now that we understand some of the basics of supervolcanoes, let's take a look at the way they've shaped our world. According to the BBC, scientists have identified 15 supervolcanoes. As you can see from this map, most are located in East Asia, North America, and South America. The telltale sign of an ancient supervolcano is a giant crater known as a caldera. The photo you see here is a caldera that is now Lake Toba in Indonesia. The largest volcanic lake in the world, it was created by a super eruption 75,000 years ago. This aerial view from a NASA satellite gives you a sense of the Toba caldera, which is 18 miles wide and 60 miles long. But supervolcanoes don't just affect the immediate area. According to a report on NPR, the amount of ash propelled into the atmosphere by a supervolcano eruption could darken the sky around the world for so long that temperatures decrease by an average of 20 degrees Fahrenheit. A 2017 study in Nature Communications states that supervolcano eruptions can cause earthquakes, landslides, and tsunamis that last for tens of thousands of years. Fortunately, the likelihood of any of us being around for a super eruption is almost non-existent. The last one occurred in New Zealand 26,500 years ago. But there is a supervolcano right here in the United States. It's responsible for this, which I visited last summer. This is Old Faithful, one of 500 geysers at Yellowstone National Park. The park is also home to hundreds of hydrothermal pools, like the one you see here, which is larger than a football field. The geysers and hydrothermal pools are some of the most beautiful sights above ground at Yellowstone. But things are quite different beneath the surface. What's down there? First, there is a large magma chamber, as shown here in a picture from National Geographic. This chamber contains enough magma to fill the Grand Canyon 11 times over. But second, even though this chamber is huge, it's dwarfed in comparison to a giant magma plume that extends more than 20 miles into the earth. When Yellowstone erupts again, all of this magma will be truly devastating. I say when it erupts again because it has erupted 3 times already. 2.1 million years ago in a large eruption, 1.3 million years ago in a smaller eruption, and 640,000 years ago in a truly massive eruption. According to the US Geological Survey website, this last eruption covered more than half the United States in a layer of ash up to 40 feet deep, from California to the Mississippi River. Geologists agree, it's only a matter of time until Yellowstone erupts again. In this speech, I've tried to inform you about the sleeping giants beneath our feet. Right now, magma is dripping ever so slowly into giant chambers in the earth. One day, perhaps thousands of years from now, another supervolcano will explode again, changing our world forever. But this is no reason for us to be alarmed today. In fact, to me, it's cause for awe at these sleeping giants and what they can do.
So there you go, an example of a formal and informative speech. So, what was her subject?
Supervolcanoes.
What is the type? What? Type, object, process, event, or concept. For volcanoes is an object. Now, she did talk about processes. She did talk about some events that happened throughout history, but those are all secondary. So again, gives you an idea of how kind of you have a primary as well as secondary for some of your supporting points. What was the primary method? It's all informative. So, describe, explain, demonstrate, define, describe. We're all over the place. That's usually the way it is. Like, who thinks it's defined? Show of hands. Who thinks it's described? Okay. Who thinks it's explained? Who thinks it's demonstrate? Yeah. So I actually think it's kind of a little bit of explain, a little bit of describe. And some of her supporting points do demonstrate how this process works. I would say her overall goal is to share with us how supervolcanoes operate, by giving us examples of them, by telling us how they are created. So I would say her primary is actually explain. But again, she uses all of them. She for her sub points, for her main points, she's describing features. She's demonstrating processes. She's defining terms for us. And so again, that's why after you write a speech, it's a little more difficult to go back and kind of put the genie in the bottle, so to speak, right? It's hard to go back and place it into a category because you may change it, you may modify it, you may update it, and it may get a little blurry. And that's why you really just use this to guide you at the start. And so here we're kind of trying to go in reverse after she's already started this process and then revised it, updated it, modified it, all that. What was her organizational pattern?
Definitely wasn't chronological.
It's not chronological. There you go. Rule that one out. Topical. Yep. That was her primary, right? These were just 3 topics. What were her main points?
Explanation.
Yep. So there were 3. What was the first one?
It was like the scale.
She provided the scale. So essentially, how supervolcanoes come to be, right? And what they are, kind of a how and what of supervolcanoes. What was the second main point? Right. She provided some history, right? And then she provided some modern examples, like I would say that could be her main points. So again, they fall into these kind of 3 categories, or actually it was kind of the how and the what. History was more examples. We can kind of divide this into, first is what, and explain what are they, and then how are they. The mechanics, I believe, was the word that she used, mechanics of it. So that would be her main points. So there you go. That's an example of formal informative speech, like what you should be giving on the 24th of October. Before you leave, I would like us to, like we did last week, Chicago Places, what is, as of right now, this can change, this isn't set in stone, but what is your informative speech subject? You may see it as topic on the outline, which we kind of use those interchangeably sometimes, which can get confusing when we talk about topical organizational patterns. But what is your informative speech subject? And just write it on the board. I'll take a picture of it. It can change, and then you're gonna be posting your discussion post with your preparation stage on Blackboard. That's what really claims it. But I'll just take a picture to kind of see what direction you all are going. And again, this is just your general subject. Questions before we go? Yeah. Yeah, sure, the cars can be your subject.
No, sometimes been like, would it be, the type would be, like, process or object?
It could be defined or described maybe, or if it's how, it can be explained. So this is where maybe, let me pull up. So before we go, let me have everyone's attention just a couple more minutes. Your screen.
Against a bunch of people like my height and like me and my skill.
All right, let me get your attention just a little bit longer. So where do you go to claim your topic? Because this is due by the 3rd. So where do you go to claim your topic? It's going to be under Module 2, Informative Speech Topic Selection. I give you the instructions as well as just a copy of the preparation stage of your outline. So this is what you will copy and paste. You'll create a thread and you will paste your speech preparation stage into a Blackboard discussion post. So again, look at other people's discussion posts before you post and make sure it's not the same exact. You can have the same subject, but can't go the same direction. So it must have a different either method or a different organizational pattern. So it must be just a little bit different. I can't tell you how many speeches I've had about Chicago sports teams. I've had a lot of them, but when I've had them in the same class, they've gone different directions. Some have gone more specific players, some have gone more the history of a team, which would be chronological. So again, it all depends on the direction that you want to go. So I will review those on the 3rd, after you submit them. If you have any questions as you're working on this, let me know. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being present and participating and being active. You all did a great job today with your practice speeches. You're on it, you got it. This was a great practice. Again, this is building that skill. And we're gonna enhance it just a little bit more by covering delivery techniques and using visual aids next week. So come prepared to learn a little bit more about that and come prepared to work more on your drafts. So that's what we have next week. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.
You can change the topics, right?
You can change your topics, yep. It's not set in stone until you submit the final version.
Over the 3rd, you have to submit the examples, the outline, already built in, or did you just write?
Yeah, so it should look like this right here.
Oh.
Wow, you can just copy and paste this, make your selections, and type in your general subject. And that's all.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
Don't worry, I'll have a lot of good adjectives.
My pleasure.
I worked there for 2 years, I know so much about Chick-fil-A. I know all the secrets. I know all the secrets. I can tell you.
You're not there anymore.
Yeah, I am.
Oh, they won't know, but
I am in the summer.
we're gonna be like,
What am I gonna call you, like, Nathan?